the greatest detective novel in history, Sherlock Holmes,
The Adventure of the Noble Bachelor.
It was one of those quiet London mornings when the fog still clung to Baker Street, and I, Dr. Watson, found myself once again at Holmes's side. The world outside moved at its usual pace, yet inside our sitting room at 221B there was a sense of suspense, as though a new case was about to arrive at our doorstep. I couldn't have guessed then that it would involve nobility, a wedding, and a bride who disappeared under the most mysterious of circumstances.
The autumn fog lay thick over London that morning, the sort of fog that turns the air to mist and leaves the gas lamps glowing like faint yellow stars. From my chair by the fire at 221B Baker Street, I watched the gray veil drift past the window. Holmes sat opposite me, cross-legged in his armchair, his long, thin fingers pressed together in his familiar pose of meditation. His eyes were half closed, though I knew from long experience that his mind was far from asleep. He was waiting, always waiting for the next puzzle to break the monotony of our shared existence. For myself, I had given up trying to predict when such puzzles would arrive. Sometimes days went by with nothing more than newspapers and Holmes's experiments to occupy us. At other times, clients came rushing in one after another until I could scarcely keep track. But there was something about Holmes's posture that morning, a sort of quiet readiness that made me believe a case was not far off. Sure enough, just before 11, Mrs. Hudson tapped at the door and entered, carrying a silver tray. On it lay a single visiting card, engraved in fine script. He picked it up, glanced at it, and passed it silently to me. The card read, Lord Robert Walsingham de Vere St. Simon. I whistled softly. A nobleman, I exclaimed. Holmes gave me one of his faint smiles. Yes, Watson, and one who comes here in person rather than through intermediaries. That suggests urgency or embarrassment. Embarrassment? I asked. You will see. At that moment, our door opened again, and Mrs. Hudson announced, Lord St. Simon. The man who entered was of medium height, impeccably dressed in morning coat and gloves. His features were fine, aristocratic, but his expression was troubled. Though he carried himself with the polished air of a man accustomed to society's highest circles, there was a stiffness about him, as though coming here, to Baker Street, was a matter of reluctance rather than choice. Holmes rose, bowed slightly, and motioned him to the chair opposite mine. Pray take a seat, my lord. You find us at your service. Lord St. Simon inclined his head, though he did not immediately sit. He stood for a moment, drawing off his gloves with slow, deliberate movements, as if gathering the courage to speak. You have, I am sure, heard of me, Mr. Holmes, he said at last. Holmes's lips twitched with amusement. Your lordship's marriage has been the talk of London this past week. It is, I believe, to Miss Hattie Doran, daughter of a wealthy American industrialist, a ceremony at St. George's, Hanover Square, followed by a reception of some splendor. The nobleman's eyes widened slightly. You are remarkably well informed. It is my business to know such things, Holmes replied simply, settling back into his chair. But you are not here to hear me list facts you already know. Please, tell us what has brought you to Baker Street this morning. At last, Lord St. Simon sat down, crossing one leg over the other. For a moment he studied the fire, and when he spoke again, his tone was one of irritation, masked by courtesy. Mr. Holmes, I have been placed in a position of the most extraordinary humiliation. My wife, my bride of only yesterday, has disappeared.
She has vanished, Mr. Holmes, from the very heart of my wedding breakfast, and no trace of her has been found since." I could not suppress my astonishment. "Disappeared?" I cried. "You mean she left of her own will?" "Indeed, Dr. Watson," Lord St. Simon replied, giving me a brief, weary glance. "One moment she was seated beside me, pale but calm. The next she had excused herself, vanished without word or warning. It is a scandal of the worst sort, Mr. Holmes, and unless she is found, I shall be made a laughing-stock before the entire world." Holmes leaned forward, steepling his fingers, his sharp eyes fixed on our visitor. "You have done well to come to me, my lord, but I must have every detail, however small or uncomfortable it may be, for only through detail can truth be found." Lord St. Simon shifted uneasily, but there was a determination about him now. He had cast aside the reluctance with which he first entered, and his pride, though clearly stung, was no longer enough to prevent him from speaking freely. "Very well, Mr. Holmes, you shall have the truth, but I beg your discretion in the matter. The dignity of my name and of my family depends upon it." Holmes inclined his head. "My lips are sealed." Thus began one of the strangest tales ever to reach us in Baker Street, and one that proved once more how the affairs of the heart can entangle even the proudest of men in webs more intricate than crime itself.
Lord St. Simon leaned back in the chair, his gloved hands resting on the polished head of his cane, and after a pause began his tale. Holmes sat utterly still, his head tilted slightly forward, his sharp eyes fixed on our client's face, as though he could draw truth out of him by sheer force of concentration. "You must understand, Mr. Holmes," Lord St. Simon began, "that my marriage was a matter of much public interest. My bride, Miss Hattie Doran, is the only child of Mr. Aloysius Doran, who has amassed a fortune in the gold fields of California. She is spirited, young, and of a most independent character. Our engagement was announced some months ago, and despite whispers from certain quarters about her American upbringing, my family accepted her readily. The ceremony itself was held yesterday morning at St. George's, Hanover Square. It was attended by a host of distinguished people, friends, acquaintances, family connections, as well as a number of idle gawkers who had little business there but came to witness a fashionable event. I shall not weary you with every detail of the service, save that it went forward without disturbance, and we left the church as husband and wife." Here he paused, as though the weight of what followed pressed down upon him. "At the reception, held at my father-in-law's house in Lancaster Gate, all seemed well at first. The tables were laden, the rooms filled with chatter and congratulations. My bride was seated at my side. She was pale, yes, and spoke little, but she smiled when addressed and answered politely. Nothing suggested what was to come." Holmes tapped his finger lightly against the arm of his chair. "And what did come?" Lord St. Simon frowned deeply. "It was during the wedding breakfast. Miss Doran accepted a glass of champagne. She sipped it, then leaned suddenly toward my maid of honor, Miss Flora Millar, who was seated nearby. She whispered something, though I did not catch it. The two rose together and left the room." "Miss Flora Millar," I interjected. The nobleman colored slightly. "An acquaintance of mine from years ago. She was once a dancer, something of a figure in her circle. I had, in truth, paid her some attentions before my engagement, but I assure you nothing improper. I broke off all connection with her the moment I met Miss Doran. That, however, did not prevent Flora from attending the ceremony uninvited, and even causing a scene at the church doors. She was removed, but somehow reappeared at the breakfast, seated as though by design. It was most unpleasant, but I thought little of it at the time." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "And Miss Doran left with her?"
Yes, they stepped out together. A few minutes later, a servant came to me in some alarm, saying that Miss Millar had returned alone, in great agitation. But my bride, my wife, was gone, vanished. I leaned forward. You searched the house. Every room, every corridor, every garden path, Lord St. Simon said bitterly. But there was no sign of her. A carriage had been seen driving away from the mews behind the house, but no one could say who was in it. I was left standing before my guests, abandoned, humiliated, mocked by whispers I could not silence. Holmes regarded him thoughtfully. Did Miss Doran give no sign, no word beforehand that she was unhappy with the match? None, St. Simon replied firmly. She was somewhat quiet these last days, but she gave me her vows freely, and I believed her loyal. I cannot believe she would act so cruelly without cause. At that moment, the door opened, and Mrs. Hudson ushered in a familiar figure, Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard. His brisk step and quick nod told us he had come on official business. "Ah, Holmes, Watson, I might have known I'd find you already engaged in this matter. Lord St. Simon, I bring you news. We have traced Lady St. Simon." The nobleman half rose from his chair. "Where is she? Speak, man." Lestrade adjusted his hat under his arm. "She was seen at the Lyceum Theatre in the company of Flora Millar, then later walking alone by the Serpentine in Hyde Park. After that, the trail is lost. Witnesses suggest she met with a man there, but no one can say more." Lord St. Simon's face turned dark. "A man? Then she has run off with some stranger." Holmes shook his head slightly, the faintest smile on his lips. "Let us not be hasty, my lord. Appearances can deceive. But I agree, the park is where the truth begins. Come, Watson, fetch your coat. Lestrade, Lord St. Simon, if you will join us, the Serpentine awaits." And so, without further delay, we set out together into the fog-choked streets of London, bound for Hyde Park and the trail of the vanished bride.
London that evening was a city of smoke and shadow, the lamps along Baker Street shining dimly through the persistent autumn fog. As we stepped into the cab summoned by Holmes, I could not help but glance at Lord St. Simon, seated stiffly across from me. His face bore the pallor of a man who has been dealt a public insult more painful than a wound to the flesh. He clutched his cane tightly, as though it were the only thing keeping him upright. Lestrade, by contrast, seemed brisk and businesslike, already rehearsing the case in his head, his notebook resting on his knee. Holmes, as usual, appeared lost in thought, his chin sunk into his chest, his long fingers steepled together in silent concentration. I had seen him like this before, a mind detached from the present moment, working unseen over the chessboard of facts until the pattern revealed itself. We rattled through the gaslit streets until the cab deposited us at the gates of Hyde Park. The hour was late. The broad walks were nearly deserted, save for the occasional solitary figure hurrying through the mist, their lamps glowing faintly. The Serpentine, that long ribbon of water winding through the park, lay before us, its surface rippling faintly under the pale light of the moon. "This," Lestrade announced, leading us along the gravel path, "is where Lady St. Simon was last seen. A park-keeper states that she walked alone in this direction. She appeared agitated yet determined. He noticed that her veil was down, which struck him as unusual given the lateness of the hour." Holmes bent low, his keen eyes sweeping across the ground. Even in the half-light, I saw him examine the soft earth by the water's edge. He moved with deliberate slowness, every step a careful calculation. "Here," he murmured at last, pointing with the tip of his walking stick. "Note the impressions.
Small, neat footprints, women's shoes. The weight falls more on the heel than the toe. She was walking quickly, but not running. The depth of the prints suggests a woman of slender build, lightly clad. The pattern is clear, though already smudged by damp air. We bent closer, Lord St. Simon frowning in impatience. Yes, but where do they lead? Holmes walked a few paces forward. Toward the water, my lord. And see here, another set of prints intersecting hers. A man's boots, heavy tread, broad sole. He waited here, by the edge of the Serpentine, before meeting her. Waited? I repeated. Holmes nodded. Observe how the soil is worn deeper in one spot, the boot having pressed down repeatedly. A man standing still, expectant. He turned as she approached, and together they moved further down the path. Lestrade scribbled in his notebook. And what does that tell us, Holmes? That Lady St. Simon came here by appointment, Inspector. She was not wandering aimlessly, nor abducted against her will. She arranged to meet this man. The secrecy of the meeting, the lateness of the hour, it all suggests something of intimacy. Lord St. Simon's face tightened. My wife, scarcely an hour after vowing fidelity at the altar, sought out a paramour in the park. Holmes gave a slight shrug. I imply nothing, my lord. I merely read what is written here, in the soil. Truth is often less flattering than imagination. We followed the tracks further until they vanished on the harder gravel near the carriage road. Holmes straightened, his keen gaze sweeping the misty expanse. From here, they likely took a cab. The driver may yet be traced, though the fog complicates matters. As if on cue, Lestrade hailed a park constable who approached with lantern in hand. The man saluted, recognizing the inspector. "You'll be after the lady in grey, sir?" he asked. Lestrade's eyes lit up. "Yes, what do you know?" "I saw her, plain enough. Tall young woman, veil down, arm linked with a gentleman's. They crossed here and stepped into a cab that was waiting by the Marble Arch gate. Couldn't make out the number. The fog was thick, but I heard the fellow call to the driver something about Grosvenor Square." Holmes' eyes sparkled at this. "Excellent. Grosvenor Square. That narrows our hunt considerably." Lord St. Simon's composure cracked for a moment, and he pressed a hand against his temple. "My wife, with another man, and to Grosvenor Square of all places! This is intolerable!" Holmes' voice softened. "Courage, my lord. We must not leap to conclusions until the chain is complete. For now we know only that Lady St. Simon left willingly, in company with a man, and proceeded toward Grosvenor Square. That is fact, not conjecture." We turned back toward the gate, the fog curling about us like grey ghosts, the gas lamps burning dimly through the murk. I could not help but feel the uncanny silence of the park, as though the trees themselves whispered of secrets hidden beneath their branches. Holmes walked ahead of us, silent and erect, his long shadow stretching across the path. At last he spoke, his tone thoughtful. "Watson, note how the smallest traces guide us. A footprint, a word overheard, a lantern's glow, and slowly the puzzle unfolds. The case has a flavor of the bizarre, but also of the familiar. I have seen this pattern before, though I cannot yet place it." Lestrade gave a short laugh. "Well, Holmes, if you don't know, no one does. Still, I'll set men to canvassing every cabman near Grosvenor Square. If the lady and her companion alighted there, someone must have seen them." Holmes inclined his head. "Do so, Inspector. In the meantime, I shall conduct my own inquiries. Watson, tomorrow morning we must call upon Lord St. Simon once more, for I believe events are moving toward a conclusion faster than even he suspects." And with that we departed the park, leaving behind the dark waters of the Serpentine and the fading tracks of a bride who had vanished like a phantom into the London night.
The next morning dawned gray and chill, with the London fog still lingering, though thinner than the night before. I found Holmes already at his desk when I descended to our sitting room at Baker Street. A small breakfast tray sat untouched beside him, and he was instead bent over a sheaf of notes and a single visiting card. His sharp eyes gleamed with that peculiar inner fire which I had come to associate with the moment when the solution to a mystery hovered within his grasp. "Watson," he said without looking up, "I trust you are ready for a most unusual denouement today." I poured myself a cup of tea, settling into my chair. "You speak as though the case were already solved." Holmes smiled faintly. "It is not solved yet, my dear fellow, but it is ready to be solved. The facts are gathered, the actors are assembled. All that remains is for the curtain to rise." Before I could inquire further, Mrs. Hudson ushered in Inspector Lestrade, brisk as ever, notebook in hand. He greeted Holmes with the satisfaction of a man bringing useful news. "We've traced the cab, Mr. Holmes. The fellow drove the lady and her companion straight to a house near Grosvenor Square, number 126. Belongs to a Mrs. Rucastle, widow, who lets rooms. The landlady swears the pair went in together and remained for several hours." "Did she describe the gentleman?" Holmes asked. Lestrade nodded. "Tall, dark, with a military bearing. American by his accent, so she claims. Paid in sovereigns and left no name." Holmes tapped the table with his long fingers, his eyes narrowing. "Just so. The pattern strengthens." At that moment, the door opened again, and Lord St. Simon entered, his aristocratic composure under strain. He looked drawn, as though sleep had eluded him. "Mr. Holmes," he said at once, "I trust you have some word. This humiliation must end. I cannot endure the whispers any longer." "Patience, my lord," Holmes replied smoothly. "You shall have not only word, but explanation. In fact, I have taken the liberty of inviting one more party to join us here this morning. You may find it enlightening." Lord St. Simon frowned, puzzled, but said nothing. We all waited in silence, the ticking of the clock loud in the quiet room. Then came a knock. Mrs. Hudson ushered in a lady heavily veiled, her step hesitant. "Ah," Holmes said gently, rising. "Lady St. Simon, I presume." At the sound of her name, Lord St. Simon started violently, his face flushing crimson. "Effie!" he cried. "Effie, what is the meaning of this charade? Why have you hidden yourself from me?" The lady lifted her veil, revealing a pale beauty, lined now with distress. "My lord," she said softly, "I meant you no dishonor, though I see now how it must appear. I could not bring myself to explain, until now." Holmes motioned her to sit. "Perhaps, Lady St. Simon, if you would allow me to present the matter as I have reconstructed it, you may then add whatever details I overlook." She inclined her head, her eyes fixed upon him with a mixture of fear and relief. Holmes folded his hands and began, his voice calm and deliberate. "Lady St. Simon, before her marriage, had spent time in America. There she met a certain gentleman, a Mr. Francis H. Moulton, to whom she gave her heart, and in truth her hand. They were married privately. Mr. Moulton, however, was soon compelled to return to the West on urgent business, and Lady St. Simon, believing herself abandoned, came back to England. Her father, eager for a brilliant match, pressed her into union with Lord St. Simon. She, wishing to please her family and believing herself free, consented. Lord St. Simon made a strangled sound, but Holmes raised his hand. "One moment, my lord." The wedding took place, and Lady St. Simon played her part with composure. But imagine her shock when, after the ceremony, she caught sight of her first husband in the very church, newly returned from America and seeking her out. At that instant, the past, thought buried, arose before her. She could not go on. Holmes turned toward Lady St. Simon, whose eyes brimmed with tears. "Am I correct, madam?" She bowed her head. "Every word. I was beside myself. I did not wish to disgrace you, my lord, nor to create a scandal.
So when Francis sent me word begging me to meet him, I slipped away. I thought only to explain, to tell him what had happened. I never meant for it to go so far." Holmes continued, his tone gentle. "Yet when you met him at the park and heard his plea, you realized the truth, that your marriage to Lord St. Simon could not stand, for you were already bound in law and honor to another man. Thus you left with Mr. Moulton, and together you sought shelter at a friend's house until courage allowed you to confess." Lord St. Simon had risen to his feet, his face pale but his jaw set. "This is monstrous. You stand before me a wife who is not a wife. I have been deceived, publicly disgraced." Lady St. Simon clasped her hands. "Forgive me, my lord. I thought, foolishly, that Francis was lost to me forever. Had I known, I would never have stood at the altar." A long silence followed, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Finally Holmes spoke, his voice firm. "My lord, your misfortune is undeniable, yet you have suffered more in dignity than in substance. No vows were consummated, no property exchanged. The law and society will recognize Lady St. Simon's first marriage as binding, and yours as null. It is better that the matter end here quietly than that the scandal be prolonged." Lord St. Simon gave a stiff bow. "You may be right, Mr. Holmes, but do not mistake me. This day has cut me deeper than you know." With that, he turned sharply and left the room, his footsteps echoing down the stairs. Lady St. Simon covered her face, sobbing softly. Holmes rose and gently placed a hand upon her shoulder. "Courage, madam. You acted under great strain. Now you and your husband must resolve matters together, away from the eyes of gossip." A moment later, the door opened once more, and a tall, broad-shouldered man entered, the same American described by Mrs. Rucastle. He crossed swiftly to Lady St. Simon and took her hand in his. "Effie, you are mine, as you always were. Let the world say what it will, we will face it together." Holmes inclined his head toward him. "Mr. Moulton, you may thank Providence that the truth has emerged before worse harm was done. Take your wife and see that she is shielded from further pain." The pair departed arm in arm, leaving the room charged with the weight of their emotions. For some minutes neither Lestrade nor I spoke. Then the inspector gave a low whistle. "Well, Holmes, that is a tangle neatly cut. I doubt even the gossip sheets could improve upon it." Holmes lit his pipe, sinking back into his chair with that air of quiet satisfaction that always followed a case well closed. "My dear Lestrade, the papers will call it scandal. Society will call it disgrace, but I call it simply human nature. There is no puzzle so complicated as the heart, and no crime so tragic as misplaced love. What say you, Watson?" I looked at him, struck once more by his singular gift for stripping away appearances and revealing the truth beneath. "I say, Holmes, that you have untangled another mystery with a surgeon's precision, and though it may not flatter the highborn, it proves once again that no man, noble or common, is exempt from the strange turns of fate." Holmes gave a quiet laugh, the smoke from his pipe curling lazily toward the ceiling. "Well said, my friend. Let us record this case under the title The Adventure of the Noble Bachelor. It may serve as a reminder that society's glitter often conceals shadows far darker than any alley in London." And with that, the case was concluded.